Hello, and thank you all for joining us for this Microsoft Reactor live stream event. We're excited to have Kyle Johnson, Senior Application Development Manager at Microsoft, back again for his second session of a two-part series. If you are joining us today and you missed the first session, it took place last Saturday and is now up on our YouTube channel. That session primarily helps you get set up and prepared for the session that's occurring today. So if you need any help with getting your programs or anything like that ready, it is a good place to reference. So I will be dropping that link into the chat shortly, and you can pull it up at your leisure to access and utilize that information. Today, he will be showing you how to build a .NET Core app for Azure Cosmos DB and Visual Studio Code. This session will run for approximately 45 minutes. Do feel free to drop questions into the chat, and he will be trying to check in on it between each unit, but majority of questions, answering them will be saved until the end. But yes, again, just if something comes up that he's covering in that moment, feel free to put it into the Q&A, and we'll revisit it later on. If this is your first time joining us, please note that the Team Live session has a 20-second delay from the speaker to the audience. So you might, ask a question that he's in the middle of answering, and he might have a follow-up question, but you might not hear that straight away. So just bear with us if you do hear any lag or quiet in the in-betweens. It's just because there is those delays a little bit. This session will be recorded, and then it will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Again, I'll be dropping that link into our chat shortly. And then at the conclusion of this session, I'll be also sharing a link to our feedback survey. The Reactor program is always striving to provide new and engaging content. Your feedback definitely helps us to curate topics that are better to suit our audiences. So please take the time, fill out that survey, let us know any feedback, things you want us to show and showcase, so on and so forth. So again, thank you all for taking time out on your weekend to be here today. And also thank you, Kyle, so much as well for taking this time. At this time, I'm going to pass the mic over to Kyle.
Thank you, Rebecca. So hello everyone. We're continuing this Learn module build .NET Core app for Azure Cosmos DB and Visual Studio Code from last week. Again, like Rebecca said, this was a two-part session. So last week we just kind of went over creating a Cosmos DB account, and we used that account to create a database and a collection, which is a table typically, and in Visual Studio Code. And then we created we laid the groundwork for a basic Cosmos DB CRUD application. We didn't actually do any create, reads, update, and deletes. We're going to do that today, and that's what we're going to do using Visual Studio Code. We're going to finish that CRUD application. Then we're going to continue on building on top of that application to query the data from the actual Cosmos DB using link, and then I'm going to show you how to create and run a store procedure from the CRUD application. So that being said, let's get started. Okay, so let me get this out of the way. Okay, so from last week, we used our sandbox that was given to us in the Learn module to do everything in. So if you have not activated it, this is the time to do it. And you also want to create that Cosmos DB account also that's in the first exercise, just to kind of catch up if you haven't already done it. Okay. Okay, so moving on to the next exercise. This is where we left off. We're going to add code to our CRUD application, that console app that we created last week, to create, read, update, and delete the data in the Cosmos DB database. Okay, so going to Visual Studio Code. Okay, this is where we left off. So I have my basic CRUD application here that calls that basic operations method. And again, let me kind of run this again, just make sure this is where we left off. And basically all it does is that it checks for the actual user. It checks to see if there's a user and a web customers collection in the actual Cosmos DB. And if it is not already one in there, it creates it. So as you can see here, it created the users database and it created the web customers collection because it did not exist already. Now, to move forward though, because as you could see in the code, this creates a database and a collection, but it does not set the partition key. So actually you wanted to actually delete this database and you want to recreate it so you can actually set the partition key in the database. So I'm going to delete it and I'm going to actually create a new database. And make sure you follow the instructions in the Learn module to the letter, because if you make this lowercase, for example, your code will not, the rest of this code will not work. So type in exactly how I'm doing it. Okay, so now everything should be created again. Okay, so now we have our user database and our web customers collection. Okay, so now we can move on with the actual code. All right, so let me take this off. All right, so going to the Learn module, it first starts off by going through creating the documents. So a document essentially is a row in a collection, which is a table. So they first have us create a user object. This is going to represent a user document in the web customers collection. So I'm going to paste that object in here. And again, this represents a user record or object inside the Cosmos DB web customers collection. You have your ID, user ID, your last name, first name, email, dividend, order history, which is another object, your shipping preference, which is another object, and coupons used, which is another object. All right, and they're going to all serialize this. And this is all going to come back in JSON. So that's the user object. This is the order history object. Okay. This is your shipping preference object. And this is your coupons used object. And this is basically a write to console method just to write out what was actually done. All right, this is your write to console method, which basically writes out anything to the console that we tell it to. Okay, so this is basically your user document layout. You have your user, and like I said, inside there you have your order history, shipping preference, and coupons used. This is your document structure. Okay. Now after you add that to the code, you want to always do a sanity check to make sure you didn't create any errors while you were adding anything, and just do a document run. And nothing what else other came out should happen before. So you didn't really add anything different, but add that structure. Okay. So now we're going to add a create user document method to actually create a document inside of the web customers collection. So that code is here as it is specified in the Learn module. And as you can see, this basically calls an async method called read document. And what it's going to do, it's going to check the database, the collection for a particular user ID you pass in. And then if it's going to see if it exists or not. If it does not exist, it's going to say user already exists in the database. Okay, and it's going to print out the user ID. And then if it does not exist, it's going to create it, as you can see here, create document async, and it's going to create that user in the actual collection. All right, so let's add code to create some user documents. So we're going to add this first section, and then we're going to do these one by one. So we're going to actually go back to our basic operations method, and we're going to add some code to create a user document. So as you can see here, we're building a new user. We're setting the ID, user ID, last name, first name, email, order history, creating an object from that, the order history. Then we're creating a shipping preference object. And then we're calling the create user document if not exist method that we added below. It's going to pass in the database, the collection name, and the actual user object. So let's actually run this. Oops. Let's actually run this and see. All right. And it says user created user 1. So it worked. So that user object or row did not exist in the web collections, and it actually created it. All right. Now let's create another one. Let's add a second one in there. And we're just going to add the next one in here. They have us add 2 in the actual Learn module. So we're going to add the second one in there. We're going to go back to our basic operations method, and then we're going to actually add the second one. And this adds a second user in there with the ID of 2. Okay. So now we're going to do a .NET run again. And now it should tell us user 1 already exists. It was already added to the web collection. And it created the second one. So it worked. All right. So we have just added 2 user documents to the table. Now we're going to move. We're going to go to the next part, and we're going to read them. So we're going to actually add this method, read user document, and I'm going to explain this as when I add it. So all right, this is read user document, and it's going to call the read document async method. All right, and it's going to pass in the document URI by your database collection name and a user ID. It's going to get back a URL, and then it's going to actually read that database and web collection to see if that user ID exists in that web collection, in that collections web customers. So if it does exist, it's going to print out read user and the user ID. And if it does not exist, it's going to say user with the ID is not read. So let's actually add the code to call this. So we're gonna add the method call to our basic operations code to add this right after our create. And this is going to read the user document, and it's gonna, if it finds it, it's gonna read it and tell you it read it. If not, like I said, it's gonna say it's not found. So let's actually run the code to see if this works. And user 1 already exists, user 2 already exists, and as you can see, it found the first user object and it read it. So it worked. Okay. So that's read user. So went to create, went to read. The next one is replace. All right. So this is your update. So we're going to copy the code to do the replace, sticking with the learn module. And we're going to, again, call in the replace document async method. All right. Passing in the database collection and then the user ID. And then it's going to replace what we tell it to replace. In this case, the last name. And then if it doesn't find the actual object or the document, it's going to print out that object was not found or that document. And let's add the code to actually do the replace to the actual basic operations method here. So this is going to look for this object, the last name, and it's going to replace it with Sun or Sue. And it's going to call the replace user document method by doing that. So let's run this. All right, user 1 exists, user 2 exists, it read user 1, and it replaced the last name. And if you actually want to see your data, there is a way to actually see it inside of Visual Studio Code. If you actually go under documents, on the web view, you can see the 2 documents we added. And if you click on the first one, you can see it shows you the JSON, and you can actually see it changed the last name. And you can actually see the JSON for both of them. So you don't have to go to the Azure portal to actually see the actual data. You're going to see everything through Visual Studio Code. All right. All right. Now the last one, delete. So we're going to actually add the delete code to the actual CRUD application. And it's going to call delete document async. All right. Passing in the same parameters as the rest of them. And again, if it finds it, it's going to delete it. And if it does not find it, it's going to print out user not found. Then let's add the method call for delete. And now let's run this. User 1 exists, 2 exists. It read user 1, it replaced the last name, and now you can see it deleted the object. Okay. Now if you go do a refresh, you see the document is now gone. Okay. So that is your create, right? Your read, your update, which is replace, and delete, your CRUD application methods. So now I'm going to pause here for a minute and take any questions on what just was covered. So before I move on.
At the moment, it does not appear that there are questions that have come through, but again, anybody that is tuning in, please just feel free as they come up to drop them into the Q&A.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna move on while we're waiting on for questions, and I'll just get to them at the end, because all we're going to cover now is basically creating stored procedures and querying the data. So this shouldn't take but so long, and we'll have a lot of time for questions. So that being said, let's move on. So in the next exercise is querying the actual CosmosDB database. So they actually show you two ways. They actually show you how to query the database using LINQ, and they actually show you how to query the database using direct SQL. The code looks sort of similar. So let me just get that code and kind of walk you all through it. All right, so, all right. This is execute simple query method they have for you. Let me hide this so we have more room. So they both call this create document query method, and they both pass in the database and collection name and the actual object that is going to actually return from the query. And see here they have a LINQ call using a where clause where they're going to query the actual document where last name equal this, and it should return a item from that collection. All right. Then they have a similar method down here calling the same kind of create document query method, your same structure user, and passing in the same parameters for the database and collection. And see here is using direct SQL. So you can either do it using LINQ if you're more comfortable with LINQ, or you can use direct SQL. Either one, it's no advantage to one or the other, right? Just really your preference. So then it's going to push that query to database, get back the results, and return the results in the console window. So let's actually make our call to the actual to the actual, so we can query it. And we're going to put that underneath this actual, we're going to put it before the delete. All right, and now we're going to actually run it. Now, if you don't want it to go through all the steps of creating, reading, replacing, you could just comment those out. But I'm just leaving them in there for clarity. All right, user 1, user 2, read, replace. Now it ran the actual link query. So let me maximize this, and you can see it's running the link query. This is what it returned, that JSON. Then it ran the direct SQL query, which returned the same exact thing. So like I said, either way works. Okay. Some people are more familiar with LINQ than SQL, and some people are more familiar with SQL than LINQ. So, but either way, it works. And that's basically what you need to do to query a Cosmos DB database. Just call the create document query method. Okay. Let me check now to see if there are any questions.
Hey, Kyle, you did receive a few. Do you want me to just read them to you? Or
Yeah, that works. Yes,
okay,
thank you.
Great. Paul said, I received the following error when attempting to run the code. Error, one or more errors occurred. Partition key provided either doesn't correspond to definition in the collection or doesn't match partition key field values specified in the document. Any ideas of what that means?
Yes, so I know it. That's a very common error, and I can tell you either you did one or two things. You either created your database and collection using this code, or you you didn't specify the correct partition key. Remember I said earlier that partition keys are case sensitive. So if you put in uppercase user ID versus lowercase user uppercase I then D, you're going to get this error when running this code. So the easiest thing to do to kind of correct all this is go back to your Azure Cosmos DB account, and you want to delete the database, and you want to recreate it again exactly like they're specifying in the Learn module. And the way they specify creating the partition key is lowercase user, uppercase I, then D. And this number doesn't matter. Like I said, this is the throughput capacity, but in the Learn module, they have you specify 1,000. And I talked about that in the first part a little bit. And that will actually match the code. The code does not actually create a partition key when you run it. So to actually get that partition key added in the actual database, you have to manually create the database, either through Visual Studio Code or the Azure portal. So I hope that helps. All right, next question. Any more questions?
Yep. So someone said that they think they missed the DB connection piece. Did we use secrets or is it plain text?
We use plain text.
Okay.
So,
and then they said if it's a two-parter, so let me just.
Okay.
If not using secrets for database password, how can we implement them in .NET Core apps using Cosmos DB?
Okay. So the way we connect it to our Cosmos DB, we use a config file, and we specify the account endpoint, as you can see here, to the actual Cosmos DB, and then we specify the key in here also that we copied from our connection string. And that's how we connect it to our database from here. I hope that answers the question.
Let's see. All is working well. They said this question is about VS Code running using F5. They said they have no console.
Oh, to go to the console, it's called terminal in Visual Studio Code. That's what they mean.
Okay. And then I think that was it for the question. So
okay.
If that covers it, if you want to carry on, and then, as mentioned earlier, there is a delay, so you may get to questions now, and you might be asking follow-up as soon as you hear it coming through on the feed, but there might be a delay before we follow up with you again. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the last thing in the actual Learn module is creating a store procedure. So to create a store procedure, you're going to go to your database under your collection. You're going to see an item for store procedures. So you're going to right click on that, and you're going to select the option that say create store procedure. And you're going to actually put in your store procedure name. So sticking with the Learn module. And they're actually going to create a template store procedure, just like it would if you were using SQL Server Management Studio. It creates a basic template for you to get started. You can edit it to any way you want, but it creates a sample, basically. So now we're just going to walk through just calling this store procedure. And calling this store procedure, really, all you do is just call a method that says run stored procedure. Okay. It's going to actually look in the user's database, the web customers collection for your stored procedure. And for any store, and it's going to pass that object. So let's actually add the method run stored procedure, because I didn't do that already. And this is the run stored procedure method. Okay. Now, the run stored procedure calls execute stored procedure async, and it's going to basically connect to your database, and it's going to look inside your collection for a stored procedure named update order total, which I created earlier. See right there, right? And this is the code right here. And like I said, it's just the basic template they give you when you create a store procedure. Nothing special. And all this does, it selects the first item in your actual collection that you pass to it. That's all it does. It selects all the items, my fault, that you pass to it. So that's all this does. And then it's going to say, after it calls it, it's not going to return any data. It's just going to say store procedure complete. I'm going to show you how to return the data, but I just want to run this just to, you all can see this work. And that's the one thing they don't show you in this actual Learn module, is how to actually return the data from the store procedure, but I'm going to show you. All right, so done and run. Again, I'm walking through everything because I left it in there. All right, and as you can see, that is the call from the query, and this is the store procedure right here call. Store procedure complete. All right. So that's basically all you do to call a store procedure. You pass it the database, the collection, and the actual name of the store procedure, and you pass that to the execute store procedure async method, and it will call that store procedure. Now, what they don't show you in here, which is I'm going to actually cover, because this was kind of something I felt they left out, is how to actually return data from here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add a return value from to this. And then I'm going to actually do I'm going to change this right line. I'm going to actually do result dot response, and that's going to actually return the actual data. So let me clear my screen, and what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to actually comment out a lot of this other stuff. So I'm going to have to create, the read, the replace, the execute query, and then delete, just so we can see the results of just this one store procedure call. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually run this now, and that should must didn't. There we go. So as you can see now, I must have missed a call, but you can actually see now that it returned the JSON from the actual collection. And that's how you return the actual response back from the store procedure. As you can see in the store procedure, it already has code in here to return the response back is JSON. It's called the set body method and returns the JSON back. Okay, well, that's it for the entire Learn module. So I guess now we can go back to see if there are any questions.
There hasn't, hi Kyle, there hasn't been anything that's come through just yet, but if we give them just a few moments to catch up, to run through everything that you've just shown them, we might get a few here at the tail end. So if you don't mind just hanging out for a few.
Okay, no problem.
And while we wait for some questions, let me just pull up my slides. Just stand by for 1 second, please, and I'll pull those up so we can get the survey out to everyone.
Do I need to unshare my screen? Rebecca?
Sorry, I just muted myself.
Okay.
Just give me 1 second and then I'll get my deck up.
Okay.
Yep, and everybody that's joining us today, thank you again. I dropped the link for the YouTube video from last week's session for getting you set up into the chat. So if you hadn't done that before and you want to revisit that and then review everything that Kyle covered today, do feel free to do so. And that link will also just take you to our generic Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel, so you can also check out the other content that's available there. Most of our sessions that we do present are recorded and then posted there, so just keep that in mind. If there's ever time that you are unable to make a session, you can always just send us, the coordinators, a message on Meetup, and then we can always check back and see, you know, you can see if it's being recorded and if it's being posted there. We don't have any questions yet. Again, there's a little bit of a delay between us and them, so let's just give it another minute and see what happens. And I will be sharing my screen in just 1 second. Sorry about that.
No problem.
And okay, so just override yours there.
Okay.
Just a moment there. Perfect. Yep, so anybody that's on the call with us today, just while we're waiting for some questions to come through, if you are not a part of our community yet, if you heard about this event through a friend, if you just saw it, maybe messaged on Twitter or on a quick search online, do know that we run the majority of our registration through meetup.com. We are an international program, so we have events that are cross-promoted internationally, but also some individual localized events based on time availability. So do check out various locations. If you happen to be a morning person or a night person, you know, we might have some events that aren't listed on your local channel, but might be listed somewhere else, and it works with you and your wake and sleep habits. So do definitely check that out. Also, for easier access and to see the list of events all together, we do have the microsoftreactor.com calendar, so you can just go there and you're able to manipulate the search feed there and see multiple locations listed. We have recently started a monthly newsletter that highlights a lot of our top events for each month, a lot of the featured specialties, you know, professional speakers like Kyle today. We will promote those through that newsletter, so you can also sign up with that. And then, if you don't mind, I will drop this link into the survey as well. I mean, the survey link into the Q&A as well. But if you don't mind, take a few moments, enter in the event code, which is 12458, and submit some feedback and let us know what you thought of this session, what kind of content you're hoping to see in the future. And at this time, Kyle, it looks like we did get a couple questions in that interim. Someone asked how to build and deploy to Azure the same project.
So this is a console application. Usually you wouldn't deploy these to Azure unless you're going to build like a VM and you're going to actually install this on a VM in Azure. Or another way you could probably do this is turn this into some type of Azure function and put some logic around it that way. But those are the only two ways I can think of at this time to kind of put this code in Azure.
Perfect, thank you. And then the second question was, how do we add a test case for the same project?
So adding test cases to this project is just like you would any console app, basically, and you can do it inside here if you want to use JScript, something like I believe it's JUnit, but it's a JavaScript test unit that you can use to actually add code to your console, or you can actually take the same project, bring it up in Visual Studio, full-blown Visual Studio, and you can add cases through there just by right-clicking and add a test project. So.
Okay, perfect. So that looks to be the majority. Oh, wait, something might have just popped through. Okay, yes. Sorry, I was about to be like, and that's all of our questions. So someone just asked, how do we debug and optimize the Azure Cosmos DB performance?
So that is what I kind of touched on last time with the throughput capacity when you're basically creating your database. Basically, the more obviously the performance depends on a lot of things, but it actually depends on the number of request units you have set to the actual database. So if, let's say, 1 million people were going to hit this Cosmos DB database and it was going to do, 100,000 reads or 100,000 writes per second, you want to make sure your initial throughput capacity is greater than what this learn module actually told you to set it to, which is 1,000. You want to set it to something obviously higher than that so you can support that load upon the database. And the more request units you have available for operations, that should make your Cosmos DB more performant.
Cool. So I think we can give it another second if you have a moment.
Yeah,
that was the questions. I will just let that switch over to them. Here we go. Someone just asked, is there any challenges if we want to use TDD approach using this same tech stack? How to overcome, if any?
So there are no different challenges to using test-driven development here versus anywhere else. Test-driven development is just a methodology that allows you to write test cases that will support the code before you write the actual code. So this same way you would do it in any other stack, you would do it here. It's really no difference.
Perfect. So, okay, at this time, I think we will call it a wrap.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all again for tuning in with us this weekend. Thank you, Kyle, so much for giving us your time and walking us through this Learn track. Everyone, again, this session was recorded. It will be available probably the middle of next week. Wednesday or Thursday, just because it's the weekend. It will take a few days to get it up onto our YouTube channel. If you have any questions continued on with this information, you can message your local, if you join through Meetup, one of the Reactor coordinators, and we can always relay that information to Kyle. Yep, and then otherwise do check in on our calendars. We're always updating them. There's always new content being rolled out. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your days. Have a good one.